There is a silence they burned along with the books. In the year 325, 300 men gathered in a hall in Nicaea. Outside, thousands of sacred texts were spread across wooden tables, rolled scrolls, ancient codices smelling of incense and centuries of dust. Inside, the most dangerous decision in the history of the West: what you were allowed to know about God, what you were allowed to think about your own soul, what you would be permitted to feel when you closed your eyes and searched for the sacred. Most of those manuscripts were never seen again. Flames devoured entire scrolls in public squares, libraries were looted, copyist monks were ordered to destroy originals, but the fire could not erase what was written in them. It could not kill the idea that pulsed in every line, an idea so simple it was frightening, so powerful it needed to be buried under layers of dogma, ritual, and fear. The kingdom of God is within you, not in the marble temple, not in the hands of the priest, not in the basilicas of Rome. Inside, here, now. Eckhart Tolle found that sentence 20 centuries later, not in a forbidden library, but sitting on a park bench in London, on the verge of suicide, trembling with existential panic. And when the presence took over the emptiness he was, when the character Eckhart collapsed, and only pure consciousness observing itself remained, he understood why this truth was hunted as the most dangerous of heresies. Because if the divine is in you, who needs intermediaries? If the door to the kingdom is in your breath, who needs golden keys? If the temple is your body, who needs cathedrals? The Gnostics knew. Valentinus, Basilides, the followers of Thomas. Meister Eckhart knew and was almost burned alive for saying it in German sermons in the 14th century. The Sufi mystics knew, and Mansur al-Hallaj was quartered in Baghdad for declaring, "I am the truth." The Jewish Kabbalists whispered in basements. The early Christians before Rome, before Constantine, celebrated in catacombs where everyone had direct access to the Spirit. All were persecuted. All were silenced. All repeated the same intolerable blasphemy: "You need no one between you and the sacred. The door is here, it always has been, it never closed, but open doors do not build empires." So they created separation. They created original sin, that genetic wound impossible to heal alone. The idea that you are born broken, stained, distant from God from the first breath, and that there is only one way back, through them, only through them. Through confession, penance, obedience, tithes, submission. Inner silence became a danger. Stillness, a void to be urgently filled with memorized prayers, litanies, complex rituals, untouchable hierarchies. They turned the inner path into an external road, long, full of tolls, guarded by gates that only open with institutional permission. And you paid. We all paid. For centuries, Tolle discovered something the forbidden texts already said: the mind is the last corrupt priest. It convinces you that you are your thoughts, that your identity is made of memories and fears, that the past defines you like a court sentence, that the future will save you if you only suffer enough now. But between one thought and the next, there is a space, a silence, a luminous void, and that is where the fire cannot reach. That is where no institution can enter. That is where the kingdom has always been, untouched, waiting for you to stop looking for it on maps drawn by others. The Nag Hammadi texts, discovered in 1945 by an Egyptian peasant digging near a cave, rolled up in red clay jars, hidden for 1600 years in the desert, buried when the persecution arrived, protected from the fire. Inside them, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Truth, texts the early church decided to erase from collective memory. And there it is, preserved in the clay, in the Coptic language. The kingdom is within you and around you. Not in buildings of wood and stone. Split a piece of wood and I am there. Lift a stone and you will find me. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are the sons of the living Father. There are no mediators in that sentence. No institution, no hierarchy, just direct presence, unmediated experience, the sacred as an intimate encounter, not a belief. Why was this forbidden with such violence? Why were men burned alive for saying God was within them? Why did entire libraries turn to ashes? Because awakened consciousness does not obey blindly. It does not pay tithes to fear. It does not kneel before control disguised as salvation. True spirituality has no pope, no golden temple, no vertical hierarchy where some are closer to God than others. It happens in the now, in the present body, in the conscious breath, in the space between one thought and the next. And this cannot be sold, cannot be monopolized, cannot be used to build power. Tolle spent years in that silence after the night on the park bench, years without working, without social identity, without understanding what had happened to him. People looked at him and saw a man without ambition, without direction, sitting in parks observing trees for hours, but inside, a silent revolution, the death of everything he thought he was. Until he realized what died that night was not him, it was the idea of him. The character built over 30 years. The Eckhart who had problems, traumas, memories, expectations. The ego that believed itself to be the center of a dramatic story called My Life. And what was left when the character collapsed? Presence, pure consciousness, silent witness, what the forbidden texts called the inner light, what Jesus called the kingdom, what Paul tried to translate as Christ in you, what the Gnostics called the divine spark, what Buddhists recognize as Buddha nature, and what Rome, Constantine, the councils, the Inquisitions called mortal heresy, because you cannot control those who are awake. You cannot sell existential security to those who have found peace in the void. You cannot threaten with hell those who have transcended fear. You cannot promise future heaven to those who live in the eternal now. The real conspiracy was not hiding texts. It was hiding you from yourself, convincing you that the divine is something distant, something that requires years of sacrifice, impossible purity, specific rituals, authorized intermediaries, making you believe that enlightenment is a faraway mountain, accessible only to officially canonized saints. But Tolle, reading those forbidden gospels years after his accidental illumination, recognized his own experience. And he said the opposite of what the structures of spiritual power preach. Presence is available now, in this moment, in this breath, in the space before the next thought is born. You are 1 second away from everything they burned. You do not need initiation. You do not need permission. You do not need years of esoteric study. You just need to stop. The Gospel of Thomas says, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. This is not vague mystical poetry. It is precise instruction. What is within is the consciousness before the thought, the presence before the identity, the silence before the word. And what destroys you is living identified with the mental noise, with the compulsive narrative, with the voice in your head that never stops judging, comparing, lamenting, projecting. Tolle teaches that this voice is not you. It is the last corrupt priest charging a toll for you to access your own soul, and you pay by believing it, by obeying when it says, you are not good enough, you need more. When that happens, then you will be happy. If only the past were different. But when you realize you are listening to the voice, when there is enough space to witness the thought without being the thought, something changes. You are not the radio. You are the one who hears the radio, and you can always turn it off. The fathers of the early church knew this. That is why they created complex dogmas, mandatory creeds, sacred hierarchies, because direct experience needs no theology. Presence needs no explanation, but control needs complexity. It needs to convince you that it is complicated, that you cannot do it alone, that you need specialists interpreting sacred texts for you. But what is there to interpret in "Be still and know that I am God"? What needs to be mediated in "The kingdom is within you"? What needs a priest in the phrase "Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there"? Nothing. The original message was of radical simplicity, of direct access, of the end of separation, and that had to be destroyed. Because empires are not built on the truth that every person is a living temple. They are built on the lie that there are sacred places and profane places, holy people and sinful people, necessary intermediaries and dependent multitudes. Tolle recounts that after his transformation, when he began to speak publicly, people came to him looking for a new belief system, a new guru, a new external authority, and he always answered the same way. Don't believe anything I say, test it, observe, see for yourself. This is the opposite of every religious control structure. Every institutional religion says, believe, have faith, obey, doubt is sin. But the spirituality of the forbidden texts said, experience, know, be, doubt is the way. The Gnostics were called that because of the Greek word gnosis, which means direct knowledge, not belief, not blind faith. Intimate, experiential knowledge of the divine. They said Jesus did not come to be worshipped, but to show the path that everyone can walk. He was an example, not an exception, and that was intolerable. Because if Jesus was just the first awakened one, what stops you from being the second, the millionth? And if everyone awakens, who will fill the churches? Who will pay for salvation? Who will obey the moral laws imposed from above? So Jesus became unique, special, only begotten Son. You can try to imitate him but never reach him. You can worship him but never be like him. The distance was reinstated, the separation rebuilt, the abyss dug again between human and divine. And you went back to needing the bridge, the church, the sacraments, the hierarchy. Tolle also read the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in 1947 in Qumran, texts from the Essene community, a dissenting Jewish group that lived in the desert practicing silence, meditation, direct communion with the sacred. Some scholars believe that Jesus spent time with them, that he learned there the practices of presence that he later taught. And what did the Essenes practice? Silence. Fasting not as sacrifice, but as a cleansing of distractions. Community without hierarchy, sharing of goods, and direct access to what they called the spirit of truth within each member. None of this survived in the structure that became official Christianity. Simplicity became complex liturgy. Silence became a sermon. Horizontal community became a vertical pyramid. And direct access became a crime, punishable by death. But there is something even deeper buried in this story. Something Tolle discovered when he began to study not only what was forbidden, but why it was forbidden in that specific way. And it has to do with power, not spiritual power, political power, economic power, power over bodies, minds, territories. Constantine did not convert because he had a mystical vision. He converted because he needed to unify a fragmented empire. And to unify, he needed a single religion, with a single doctrine, with a single hierarchy. The Christians were perfect. They already had an organizational structure. They already had an emerging centralized authority. They already had the habit of obeying bishops. But there was a problem. Different Christian groups believed different things. The Gnostics said salvation was inner knowledge. The Arians said Jesus was a human who achieved divinity. The Marcionites rejected the entire Old Testament. The Ebionites followed Jewish laws. Each group had its texts, its rituals, its interpretations. Constantine could not rule an empire with 50 versions of Christianity. He needed one. So he convened the Council of Nicaea. 300 bishops traveled from all parts of the empire, and there, under direct political pressure from the emperor, they decided what was Christian and what was heresy, not by divine revelation, by vote, by politics, by imperial convenience. And everything that did not fit the chosen version had to disappear. The texts were burned, the followers exiled or killed, the practices criminalized, and in a few generations collective memory was rewritten, the official history told as if it had always been this way, as if there had never been another way to be Christian, another way to seek the divine. But the ashes do not lie, and the texts buried in the desert waited 1600 years to tell the truth. There was war for your soul, and you lost without knowing you were fighting. Tolle realized this not through historical research, but through his own experience. When he woke up on that park bench, no one had taught him how to do it. No master, no text, no tradition. It was direct, unmediated, uncontrollable experience. And when he started talking about it, he encountered resistance, not from atheists, from the religious, because he was saying that you do not need their religion, you do not need their rituals, you do not need their beliefs. You just need to wake up to what is already here. And that is an existential threat to every structure that feeds on keeping you asleep. In the Gospel of Philip, another Nag Hammadi text, it is written, "Those who say that first they will die, and then they will rise are mistaken. If they do not receive the resurrection first while they live, they will receive nothing when they die." Resurrection is not a future event. It is present awakening. It is dying to the ego now. It is being reborn into consciousness now. It is leaving the tomb of compulsive thoughts now. Not after physical death, now. In this life, in this body, in this breath. But this does not sell a place in heaven. It does not sell post-mortem security. It does not sell obedience in exchange for future salvation. So it had to be erased. Substituted by the promise of future resurrection, conditional, dependent on you behaving well according to rules imposed by men who claim to speak for God. Tolle laughs at this, not with bitterness, with compassion, because he recognizes the fear behind the control, the deep, human fear that perhaps no one is in charge, that perhaps you are alone in the universe, that perhaps you need to find meaning for yourself, without a manual, without guarantees, without external authority, saying that everything is okay, and then you create the authority, build the hierarchy, invent the intermediaries, because it is easier to obey than to be free, more comfortable to believe than to know, safer to follow than to awaken, but the price is your soul, your consciousness, your presence, your life lived firsthand, not through filters imposed by those who died 2,000 years ago. The burned texts said something Tolle rediscovered in his own flesh. You are the Christ, not as blasphemy, as literal truth. Christ is not a proper name. It is a state of consciousness. It is the awakening of the divine spark that is in every human being. Jesus was called Christ because he awakened. But the Christ is not exclusive to him. It is the real nature of everyone. Paul tried to say this, Christ in you, the hope of glory. Not Christ for you, Christ in you. But the church preferred the external version, preferred Christ on the altar. Christ in heaven, Christ distant, mediated, controlled, Christ who needs a priest to get close to you. And you accepted, because they taught you since childhood, because everyone around believed, because questioning was dangerous, because doubting was sin, because thinking for yourself was arrogance. But Tolle asks, who benefits from you not thinking? Who profits from your obedience? Who gains power over you when you believe you are broken, sinful, incapable of accessing the divine alone? The answer is in the golden cathedrals, in the Vatican palaces, in the bank accounts of mega-churches, in the power structures that have existed for centuries, feeding on your sense of separation. But when you awaken, when you recognize the presence that has always been here, the game ends. You do not need them anymore, and they lose everything. That is why they burned the texts. That is why they killed the mystics. That is why they criminalized direct access. Because awakened consciousness is the end of all spiritual control. It is the end of all religious authority that is not your own internal recognition of the sacred. It is the end of every empire built on the lie of separation. And now you know the secret they forbade. It is not esoteric information. It is not a complicated practice. It is not knowledge that takes years to master. It is simple like this. Stop. Breathe. Observe the space between thoughts. Recognize the consciousness that is observing. Realize that this consciousness is not produced by you. You are produced by it. You are its temporary movement, momentary wave in the infinite ocean. And when you perceive this, when there is a second of total clarity where the character vanishes and only pure presence remains, you understand why they burned the books, why they killed the mystics, why they built entire empires to keep you away from it. Because this destroys everything. Every identity, every belief, every fear, every control structure, and what remains is absolute freedom, presence, love, consciousness vibrating as everything that exists. They burned the books, but they could not burn the silence. It is still here, inside you, before your thoughts, after your fears, beyond your beliefs, waiting, not for 2,000 years, since forever, since before time, in the eternal now that never began and never ends. And all you have to do is stop running, stop searching, stop believing you are far away, because you never were.